Hi everyone, my name is Nick. I am the monkey butler here at the Legless Zoo. I am the human behind the camera of the training videos, the interaction videos, and everything on the channel. I have neglected the channel quite a bit in the last few years, but I am trying to relaunch it and do a little bit more with it. What I wanted to talk to you about today was target training. So if you've seen any of the videos on the channel, I've done quite a few training videos with my snakes. And what I do is I do target training. But I realized that I'd actually never spoken about why I target train, what it is, how you can get started with that if it's something that you want to do. So I thought I would maybe do a little bit of that today. So what I'm going to talk about is, first of all, why bother target training snakes and why I do it. I'll talk a little bit about how I make targets and what to use. And I will talk a little bit about how to get started. Without further ado, let's talk a little bit about why I target train my snakes. So there's a couple of reasons why you might want to do this. I've been keeping snakes for about 3 years now, and I have 4 different species. So I have 2 pythons. I have a ball python and a blood python. I have a Russian rat snake, and I have 2 Western hognose snakes. Now, none of these species are particularly problematic in terms of having a really enthusiastic feeding response, like you might have heard from things like, for example, reticulated pythons or Burmese pythons or some other species. I think scrub pythons as well. And some colubrids, like, for example, bull snakes, can have very, very enthusiastic feeding responses. And for some keepers, that can be a little bit intimidating because it means that when you open their enclosure, they can kind of charge at you thinking that food is coming. So in terms of addressing that issue, target training is really helpful. What this means then is that you can make sure that when you open an enclosure, your snake is not going to automatically assume that that's a feeding opportunity, because they will understand that food only happens when the target is there. And if the target is not there, then this is not a feeding interaction. So if you have a snake or you want to have a species like that, or you find that maybe you get a little bit anxious if your snake rushes at you when you open the enclosure, it really addresses that, and it makes sure that there's a nice clear line of communication between you and your pet so that you both understand that only the target means food and the absence of target means no food, and you can be confident then in your interactions. So that's kind of the main reason. That being said, I don't actually have any species that's an issue with. So my ball python, my blood python, my hognoses and my rat snake, whilst many of them are enthusiastic feeders, in particular Milady the ball python and Mokosh the rat snake, these are not species that are likely to kind of charge at you and assume that everything's food. They're also not species wherein a bite is necessarily particularly scary or dangerous or likely to do much harm. That being said, the reason I target train my snakes is largely because I enjoy it and it's a good form of enrichment. So for me anyway, this is a really nice way to work with my snakes, to build trust with them, to build a relationship with them, and to establish ways of communicating with them so that we understand each other, and it stimulates their brain. So them learning things and doing things, it's a nice form of enrichment. You can do quite a lot with target training in terms of simulating hunting, so they can be trained to follow a target until the target stops. And so you can move them around their enclosure and simulate hunting. You can also do things, for example, like use the target to move them off and on perhaps a weighing station or in and out of a carry box if you need to take them to the vet, or perhaps you need to travel with them or something like that. So for me personally, it's mostly about enrichment. It's about the fact that I find it interesting. The snakes appear to engage very willingly with it, so they seem to find it interesting and get a lot out of it. So I mostly just do it for the interaction and the relationship with my animals. But there are a number of reasons why you might want to do that. In terms of how to make targets, so target training is something that is done with quite a lot of animals, and you might see it with perhaps dogs, for example, although I think clicker training is more common with dogs. But you may see it in perhaps zoo animals are quite often target trained in order to come to the front of an enclosure, perhaps to have a health check or to be given a vaccination or something of that nature. Now, that means that you can buy targets. So you can go online, you can search around. There's lots of different types of targets. They're usually a little ball on a stick. Sometimes there are flat ones, sometimes there are round ones. That's fine. If you want to buy a target, that's great. I've never bought a target. I just make mine. So I have a couple of examples that I can show you. They're very, very low tech and they are very cheap to do. So I primarily use 2 targets with my diurnal snakes. So that's the hognoses and my rat snake. So here's what we have. This is the target that we use for Mab, one of the hognoses. You can see what this is this is actually a silicone lid for food cans, a reusable silicone lid. I've used some hot glue here just to secure it a little bit, and I've kind of poked a bit through just to position it. And this is just a cheap pointer that is extendable that I bought from just an online shop. So these are both just online things that I bought from, Amazon, wherever you do your online shopping. And I've just, crafted this together. So this is the one that we use with Mab. Similar idea, you're going to see a pattern here. This is the target that I use for Mokosh and for Yig. So again, this is just cheap pointer, extendable that I bought. And you can see I've used, this is actually super strong kind of transparent mounting tape. And this is a plastic lid from a fish food container. So this is the one that I use with Yig and with Mokosh. Now, you'll notice that I have a blue target and I have a yellow target. I've made this decision very deliberately. So on doing some research, I found that snakes, at least daytime snakes, are dichromats. So what that means is they have 2 types of color sensing cells in their eyes. Humans, like us, we are trichromats. We actually have 3. So we can see more colors than our snakes can, but they do see color. So what this means is they can see blue, they can see yellow, and they can see a combination of blue and yellow, which is of course green. Now, I do not use green targets, and the reason I don't use green targets is that many of my enclosures have naturalistic style enrichment in them. So that means that there are green things in their enclosures, and I want to make sure that when I'm showing them their target, that target really stands out and looks completely different to anything else in their environment so that it's very obvious to them and it will grab their attention. So for my day snakes, I use either a blue target or a yellow target. Now you notice that I say my day snakes. For my 2 nocturnal snakes, that's my ball python Milady and my blood python Tsuchinoko, I do not use a coloured target. The reason for this is that these are nocturnal animals. So at nighttime, colours are just less obvious, and these are animals that primarily use heat and motion to hunt. They're not really looking at colour. It's not really a big part of their lives in the same way as it would be for a much more visual day hunting snake, like for example, like a rat snake. So I don't use a coloured target with my pythons. Instead, I use this. Now, you'll notice again, it's just another, I literally got a job pack of like 3 of these, which is the perfect amount. So it's another pointer. And what I've done here is I have taken a food lid and I've cut a little notch here because it was quite a deep food lid just so that this would sit inside it. Again, I've taped it with some mounting tape, and all I did was take some black acrylic paint and paint half of it black. So I have used a black and white target for them. The reason for this is that for an animal who's nocturnal, much of their visual experience is going to be in light and dark. So I specifically want to mimic that with a light and dark. And generally speaking, in nature, a hard line like this and a perfect circle like this are quite unusual. It's not going to be something that they would see in the normal run of things. So again, this will stand out really clearly for them and make it a lot easier for it to grab their attention and make the connection between the target and the food. It's worth pointing out that once you've chosen a target for your animal, it's very important that you stick with that specific target, that you always pair that one specific cue with food, that you never present the target without the food and you never present the food without the target. So that's how I use my little targets, but again, you can buy them, you can make them, whatever works for you. I also recommend plastic, by the way, because it's easy to clean. Generally speaking, a food lid is pretty easy to replace if it gets damaged or worn out. They're easy to clean, and also they're much less likely to cause the snake injury or get, their teeth caught in it or anything like that. So that's why I use those particular targets. So we have our snake, we have our targets. Now what do we do? Well, it depends. So, for example, if your snake is already tongue feeding, then you're in a really good position to get started pretty much straight away. So, what you'll see in some of the other videos on the channel, feel free to go check those out. What I tend to do is, so I present the target to the animal. I make sure that they notice it. I might, wiggle it around a little bit, maybe scrape it on something to get their attention. Once I know they're looking at it and I see some tongue flicks and I see that they are noticing it, then what I do is I will place the food, their mouse, whatever it is, in front of the target. And I will hold that target in visual range until they come and accept the food. Once they start eating, I then of course let go and I will remove the target. So that's the easiest way to get started. However, it is often the case that you might have a young snake, or you might have a snake that primarily drop feeds, where you are leaving the food in the enclosure and the animal's quite shy perhaps, or isn't quite as used to you. Maybe they're quite young and they're not yet quite at the point where they're tongue feeding. That's fine. You can still start laying the groundwork for target training already. So, for example, with this target, which as I mentioned is a fish food tub lid, I actually have several of these. And it's helpful to have, several versions of whatever you make your target out of, just because you might want to replace it, but also if your animal is still drop feeding. So what this means is I have a spare. So I have a spare lid like this, and I use this as their feeding tray. So when I first get an animal, if they're quite young, if they're still drop feeding, I make sure that whenever they are drop fed, their food will be on this, an exact replica of their target. Now, this is obviously helpful because one, you don't want young snakes ingesting substrate if you can avoid it. So it's a nice plastic safe thing for them to eat off of, but it also begins to establish very clearly in their mind that this color and this shape is always associated with food. So that means that you can already start making that connection for your snake, even if they're still drop feeding. So that's what I do, that's what I recommend. It's very straightforward. It's a really fun thing to do with your animals. Please do feel free to check out some of the highly unprofessional, I will say, they're not polished or anything, videos on the channel of me working with my snakes. I guess the one thing I would add here is that it really doesn't matter what species you have. You can do this, in my experience, with pretty much any species of snake. As I've mentioned, I have 4 different species and they are all target trained very successfully. Some might take a little bit longer to get the hang of it than others. Most notably, Mokosh, who's my rat snake, is really, really on the ball, very intelligent, very active, very focused, and she has learned much more quickly and has learned more complex interactions with her target than, for example, Mab, who she understands her target, she approaches it just fine, but we're not quite at the point of doing more complex things with her quite yet, and she is 3 years old. So, hog noses, it takes a little bit longer to do more complicated things, but in my experience, any snake can learn to associate food with a target and respond accordingly. Similarly, Milady, my ball python, picked up the target really quickly. So did Tsuchinoko, my blood python. So again, even these species are perfectly willing to interact with the target. It is worth bearing in mind that depending on how active your species is, will probably limit how much they are willing to follow or chase the target. My pythons move a lot less and a lot less quickly in response to their target, but they do orient to it and move towards it and begin to get that S-bend, indicating that they understand food is about to come. So whatever species you have, whatever age they are, you can absolutely do this and get started target training if you wish to do so. So I hope this was helpful. Feel free to ask any questions. If there's anything else you'd like me to talk about, then let me know. Very happy to talk through how I work with my snakes in a bit more detail. For more YouTube channels that cover things like target training, I'd highly recommend Lori Tarini. She is an animal behaviorist working over in the US and does a lot of work with training her snakes. She works with wide range of species, much wider than I do. I think it's primarily boas and pythons that she works with, but I have seen her work with rat snakes and hognoses as well. And her work is absolutely phenomenal. So I would highly recommend her. Another YouTuber that I'm aware of, again in the US, is Bob from Green Room Pythons. As the name would suggest, Bob works primarily with pythons, although I believe he also has one boa now, and has target trained a couple of his super dwarf reticulated pythons. So yeah, so by all means, of course, check out the wilds of the internet. There's a lot more out there, but I'll be updating this channel a little bit more frequently now and talking about more, I guess, behind the scenes stuff of how I go about working with my snakes. So, hope this was helpful. Hope it all made sense. Do please drop a like, a comment, any of these things. If you have any questions, let me know. Very, very happy to explain anything that wasn't clear. And I'll see you hopefully in another video sometime soon.